And then you said there was something on YouTube,
Well,
some sort of advert, or?
Well, if you'd like, what I normally do next is
that will be next. I see. Okay.
So yeah, if you'd like, we can talk a little bit about your background and what you've done over the years and things like
fine.
that. Because it sounded like right at the beginning, before we started talking, you had a lot of interesting ideas about a lot of things about just based on basically all your experiences. So if you'd like to talk a little bit about that, it would be wonderful just to talk about your background a little bit. So for example, we've been talking, and you've been at Perimeter, and you've been at Clemson, and now you're back in England. So,
well, yeah. So you're saying, how did I end up on this weird career path or non-career path? Or?
It's a path.
Well, look, basically, long story short, when I was when I was an undergraduate in Cambridge, I got interested in the foundations of quantum mechanics. And I was also interested that there were just a lot of broad questions in fundamental physics that interested me. And it looked as if the way the system worked is that, well, if you went to do a PhD, if you started a PhD, you would have to narrow down on some topic and focus on that. And I didn't feel ready for that. I wanted to explore so many things. So, and I also just had an uneasy feeling about the whole system. It seemed to me somehow backwards, as if you're supposed to decide on a topic of research before you've really done the kind of exploration that would lead you to want to pursue a certain line. It seemed to me all the wrong way around. So anyway, after I graduated, I didn't apply for a PhD position. I just went off. I spent 3 years. I lived a bit in Paris, in Vienna, and then I was doing some odd jobs and just thinking about fundamental physics. I wrote 2 or 3 papers. In fact, I got some ideas that were really the basis of this work that I've been doing. And then I met Dennis Sharma, a cosmologist who at that time was at the International School for Advanced Studies in Trieste, and he was happy to take me on as a PhD student. But there was a kind of understanding, I think between us, because I'd already published some papers, he sort of treated me more like a postdoc. And I sensed that with him I would have the freedom to pursue things in a way that, perhaps normally wouldn't be done at the level of a PhD student. And anyway, so I did this work on non-equilibrium in de Broglie-Bohm. But after that, well, where do you go for a job? Normally you do a PhD on a topic that is already, let's say, an established topic on which there are already some grants, or there are possibility of grants. They're already positioned. There are groups around the world that you can join in. There was no such thing. But but it didn't bother me, because so when I was graduating, I basically decided, as I was graduating from Cambridge, I was getting letters from investment banks. They were snapping up graduates in physics and training them in finance. And I could have gone and worked in the city and earned a lot of money. And I thought, I'm not going to do research for money. If I'm going to do research, it has to be because it's something that I'm really interested in, that I think is really important. You know, so I just decided from the start that I would do the research I wanted to do. And if I managed to get a grant and a position somewhere that would help me doing, fine. If I didn't, well, I would just do private teaching or whatever I needed to do and just carry on. So after my PhD, I ended up living in Rome. And for a few years, I was teaching English, maths, and physics privately, high school students, some undergraduate students, and continuing, I started writing a book about this research, carried on doing research. Then, and then I had a postdoc. For a couple of years, I had a postdoc at the University of Rome. That was nice. Then I moved back to London, and I met Lee Smolin, who was in London on some kind of sabbatical, and he had some money from an unusual foundation, and basically he used some of this money to give me a year at Imperial College, and then he went off to Canada to help start up the Perimeter Institute. I ended up following him there, and I was there for a few years. After that, I was supported a bit by the Foundational Questions Institute, and then there was another couple of years where I didn't have any funding. I was just doing my own thing in London. Then I got offered something in the US, a professorship in the US at Clemson. And I was there for 7 years, but again, I never thought of it as that I'm going to adapt what I do in order to make sure I get tenure, or in order to make sure I get a grant. My approach has always been, look, this is what I do, and if you want to support me, fine. If you don't, that's also fine. But then, of course, my father became ill, and for various family reasons, I felt I had to move back to London anyway. So, and now I'm hoping to support myself writing popular science. So I've got my first popular science book almost done, and a half a draft of a second one. So we'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
I had a small grant from the Blauman Foundation. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a new foundation that Carlo Rovelli is running. They gave me a bit of money to support some of this research I'm doing on these new ideas about quantum gravity and de Broglie theory. We'll see. I mean, if someone calls me up and says, look, do you want to come and have a position and we'll pay you, you're doing what you're doing, then, I'm interested. But if someone calls me up and says, listen, we'd like to offer you a job, but you got to do something to do with quantum information theory, or can you please, try to nudge it towards something? I don't work that way. It seems to me that if you do that, and a lot of people do that, I mean, it tends to be a slippery slope. I've known so many people who, when they were younger, they thought, well, I tell you what we'll do is, I'll maybe work on something more mainstream for a while, and once I get tenure, then I can do what I'm really interested in. I've never seen that work. Somehow, by the time you get tenure, you're so much in the system. You got tenure, but there's the tenure review, or you want to get promotion, or now you're part of this group and there's an expectation. Your colleague, you're in the group that does, XYZ physics. This is what we do. You can't just start doing something different. Your colleagues are going to be upset. They're probably going to increase your teaching load. You're going to have the dean breathing down your neck. It doesn't work, there really is something wrong. Academia works well when there is, there's a given research program that's clearly worth doing, and there's work to be done there, and you put in the money, you bring in the talented people, and they develop the details, and that's all fine. But when it comes to exploring alternatives or trying to go outside of the mainstream and looking at one, maybe we're doing something wrong, we need to rethink things radically. Someone who wants to do that, the system is really stacked against you. It discourages it, which is unfortunate. But I mean, I'm happy with what I've been doing, and I don't have any regrets. But the system is odd. I mean, I remember, for instance, when I was at Imperial College, the early 2000s, there would always be this phenomenon, the new crop of master students. Half of them would be excitedly talking about Schrodinger's cat, and they're really interested in these questions about foundations of quantum mechanics, and they're hoping that maybe they can do something like this for a PhD. But they very quickly learn that, well, somehow, if you want to get anywhere in academia, you have to play a certain game. You've got to find some topic that you can join in with, something that's already recognized. And then you talk to those same students a year or two later, and they start being quite guarded. You say, what happened to your interest in sort of hum and ha, and somehow maybe sometimes they will say, well, actually, I think that if we first look at quantum computing, or if we first look at black holes, maybe we'll learn something that will help us understand quantum mechanics. But often I think it comes across as a bit of a weak excuse. I think what's really going on is that they've realized that, look, in order to have a career, I better do this sort of thing. And some of it is not too far from what I'm really interested in, and some of it's still interesting. It's still interesting, but it's not really what I want to do. But you just accept it, and then you talk to the same people 5, 10, 15 years later, and I think they've just completely forgotten even what it felt like to be a bright-eyed, fresh-faced graduate student, interested in these things. I mean, there's now so much in the system, and the grind of writing research grant proposals and all of this stuff. I mean, and playing the game just becomes second nature. I do remember I have some memorable advice. There was someone at the Cavendish lab in Cambridge, a particle physicist called Brian Weber, who I think he's won various prizes now. He did important work on evidence for the standard model and so on. Anyway, but I remember him telling me as I was graduating, he said to me, I was telling him about my interest, and this was 1986. And what he said really stuck in my mind. He said, Antony, the usual advice, at that time, string theory was the big new thing. It was really taking off at that time. He said, Antony, the usual advice we give to graduate students is that, first do something more mainstream. Maybe string theory is, something more mainstream, something that is currently fashionable. And once you've got tenure, then you can do what really interests you. And he said, but then he looked at me, he said, the trouble with that advice is, by the time you get tenure, you're usually too old to do anything original. That's what he told me. And, and so I thought, stuff that. I'm just going to, if I'm not going to do what I'm really interested in, and at least, certainly in the UK in academia, not even paid very much either. It just seemed ridiculous. I mean, why don't I just go and work in finance and can make a fortune? Yeah. Anyway, so that's how it happened. But there we are. I mean, there's certainly a lot of interest. Look, I come across so many people And these days, not just students, but also, you know, academics, senior people who are interested. You know, because now the foundations of quantum mechanics is not like 30 years ago, where there was still this sense that, look, you know, there's the Copenhagen interpretation, textbook quantum mechanics, and then you've got these fringe people, you know, with their hidden variables or whatever, and they're just fringe people. I mean, that consensus has gone. I mean, the last 20, 30 years now, the interpretation of quantum mechanics is a completely open question. Is it Copenhagen? Is it many worlds? Is there some dynamical collapse? Are there hidden variables? Is it the Bohm? Is it something else? It's completely open question, and I think that now is you know, quite widely recognized. But somehow, so you have a lot of people who see this and who are interested and intrigued, but somehow the funding system hasn't caught up with this. There's still no, you know, if a student says, right, okay, there's this big open problem. We don't understand what our most fundamental theory is telling us about the world. Can I please do a PhD on this? There's virtually nowhere you can go to do that. And in fact, I managed to get some very good students come to Clemson. I mean, I had one student who'd been an undergraduate at Oxford. He'd then done his master's at Imperial. He was a sort of student who would have gone off to Harvard or Stanford or Cambridge or somewhere for a PhD. He said he came to Clemson because he wanted to work on foundations of quantum mechanics. But basically, Clemson, when I was there, was pretty much the only place in the world where he could have worked on, done a PhD in this de Broglie type theory. So you know, my feeling is that the time is actually well. I was going to say the time is right, but I think well overdue. There's huge interest. You know, the consensus about the interpretation of quantum mechanics has evaporated. There's a open recognition that there's a wide open problem, but somehow the system of funding and of academia, the way the positions, the way the whole system works, just somehow doesn't have a means or mechanism for this research to get done. If you don't have young people entering the field and then, you know, doing PhDs and then going off to do a postdoc and then going off and maybe getting an assistant professorship, if you don't have any of that, you know, what you tend to get is now and again, you'll get a PhD student who maybe does something like this, and then they go off and they leave academia. They don't get a job, you know, or you get some more senior people who do some research on this, and then they end up, I don't know, getting fired or whatever. And, you know, this is what's been happening. It's strange. There is a lot of interest. But, you know, I mean, let's say I mean, I've met a number of senior people who you know, very interested in this sort of thing, but they're working on, you know, their day job, as it were, is something more mainstream. And I said to them, you know, you've got a position, you've got a job. Why don't you know, you're interested in this. Well, you know, there would be this problem. They've got this rolling grant. You know, they've got these students in this area. They have to keep this thing going. If they neglect that, they sort of feel that, you know, they just can't. You know, they're part of a group. Perhaps they're part of it. They're in a, you know. I mean, one of the killers, of course, I think in physics now is the way physics departments tend to be divided up into groups. You know, you got the atomic physics group, you got the cosmology group, you got the astrophysics group, you got the biophysics group. You know, something like this, it doesn't fit in any group. So you've immediately got a problem. You know, if you wanted to advertise a position or a PhD position or a postdoc or something in this area, well, which group is it going to be in? You know, it just doesn't belong anywhere. So, you know, for various structural reasons, I think we've got a bizarre situation where a lot of people are interested in working on this, be it students or be it more senior people. but for various structural reasons, they don't feel they can. I'm not quite sure how that could be fixed, but certainly something. You know, I mean, I could, you know, I'm sorry, I could ramble on for ages about this. Maybe just say one relevant thing, because it's you know, it's a concrete experience that I had. So when I was at Perimeter Institute, unusually, the founding director, Howard Burton, was very interested in foundations of quantum mechanics. Is partly why I was there. He also got Lucian Hardy there, and they were handing out at the beginning. He was very keen on encouraging postdocs to do risky research. So postdoc positions were for 3 years, and you know, there were positions in string theory, in quantum information, quantum gravity, and quantum foundations. They were initially at Perimeter, they were giving out 2 postdocs a year in quantum foundations. Now, there was a problem, you know, and I was involved with this. I was on the committee with hiring. So the immediate problem was, well, hang on, there's hardly anyone doing a PhD in this area. So where are these postdocs going to come from? It was very hard to find 2 good candidates that you could offer these postdocs to, you know. But then we managed to get some. We had for a while, there was a, you know, there was a significant presence at Perimeter Institute. I'm talking about early mid-2000s, 2005, 6, 7. You know, there were a handful of people there, postdocs doing research in quantum foundations. The next problem was, well, then where are these people going to go after their postdoc? Well, you know, the natural thing is their first postdoc. Well, naturally, well, now you're going to apply for a second postdoc somewhere. Well, where? There are no groups around the world doing this research. Where are they going to go? In fact, the director, Howard Burton, you know, we discussing with him and with Lucian Hardy, you know, we realized that, well, listen, unless there were other groups around the world doing this sort of thing, you know, we're just, in a way, what are we doing? We're encouraging students to do a postdoc on this, and then they're going to end up what? Working in Starbucks or something. So for a while, Perimeter tried to, they had something called, I can't remember now the name of this program, where basically Perimeter started to partner with some groups. There was a group in Australia, maybe another one somewhere, where they said, look, we will provide half of the funding for a postdoc in your group in this area if you'll provide the other half. You know, basically Perimeter was trying to be proactive in encouraging the formation of other groups, because I mean, I think discussing this, we decided that, look, there had to be a sort of critical mass of at least 4 or 5 groups around the world in quantum foundations in order for this to be viable, you know, so that the young person could have a hope of some kind of career. I don't know what happened. I mean, at some point, Howard Burton left, I left. I mean, things at Perimeter changed. The postdoc program got scaled back. You know, a lot of things have changed since then. But it's to give you a sense of, you know, here you had a major institute that had money and was willing to fund postdocs in quantum foundations. But you see the problem you run into. Well, for a start, where do you get good candidates from? Because so few people are doing it. And then where are they going to go? You know, and I think now, where are we? Nearly 20 years later, I don't think it hasn't really changed much. I think that the core problem is still there. I mean, I have one of my students. I mean, he's managed to get a postdoc now somewhere in the UK. He did a PhD with me at Clemson. But you know, there was some good luck there. There happened to be someone who had a grant in statistical mechanics, and he happens to be interested in de Broglie-Bohm. It's a bit of fortuitous circumstances. Another one, well, you know, I mean, the chances of any, I mean, I graduated 4 students from Clemson. You know, the chances of any of them ending up getting a job somewhere, permanent position somewhere. I mean, it's going to be continuing to do this sort of work, very difficult. I mean, you know, it's and then of course you got the problem of, you know, if so few people are devoting themselves to this full time, well then inevitably progress is going to be limited or slow. You know, you get this chicken and egg situation that, well, you know, if it's a field that is, there's a lot happening and there's a lot that can be done and a lot of, you know, things that one can jump in and start working on. And that's going to encourage people, and that's going to encourage the grant agencies to fund this. Well, you're only going to have that situation if you already have a critical mass of people working on it. If you just have a handful of people here and there, some in philosophy departments, some in math departments, some, you know, people working independently, or inevitably progress is going to be limited. And then people look at it and think, well, you know, why should we fund this? Progress there's not a great deal of progress. Why? How can there be a great deal of progress if so few people are working on it? But given that now, I think, as I said, the widespread acknowledgement that this really is an open problem, someone somewhere has just got to push the right buttons and just, you know, start putting money into this, or found a group or a department or an institute or something for the study of this. You know, as happens, you know, I mean, recently I've been reading about, I mean, in Cambridge, there's this big new institute for the study of life in the universe, funded by the Leverhulme Foundation, you know, looking for extraterrestrial life. But it involves biologists, physicists, astronomers, a big institute in Cambridge, the Leverhulme Institute for Life in the Universe, I think it's called. You know, if you go back 20, 30 years, you know, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, you know, people like Carl Sagan, and, you know, we see this kind of fringy. At some point, you know, there's some sort of tipping point where suddenly enough people realize that, look, this is a serious topic that needs serious funding and serious work done. Let's put in the money and let's found, you know, the structures that can support it. I think we're close to that in quantum foundations, but it hasn't quite happened yet. You know, it's frustrating. If you know a billionaire who wants to sign a few checks and found a new institute for the study of foundations of quantum mechanics, well, you know, then let me know. But sorry, you're muted. I can't hear you.
I'll send them your way.
Right. Send him. Give him my email address. But there we are. I don't know if you know Philip Pearl.
No.
He's a very interesting man. Philip Pearl, he's now in his 80s. He's an emeritus at Hamilton College in New York State, which is a sort of small liberal arts college.
Yeah, so actually my uncle, I think it was that particular college. I think he did some work there for a while.
So Philip Pearl is someone who, back in the dark days of the early 1970s, he graduated from MIT and decided he wanted to work on the foundations of quantum mechanics. And he actually started up the idea that there could be some kind of random collapse, that you need to modify the Schrödinger equation in such a way that you get a stochastic collapse. I mean, nowadays it's quite a big area. There's dynamical collapse models. He was the first to start on this. But anyway, in the 70s, you know, I mean, there was no hope of getting any kind of funding or position. So he decided that he would just get a position in a liberal arts college where there was a lot of teaching. I mean, it was really a teaching position. I remember Phil telling me that, you know, it was basically only on Thursdays that he could do his research. The rest of the time he was just teaching. But you know, for him, and he did that. He had sort of had a career. I mean, he wrote a lot of papers. He did a lot of important work. But this was the means. You know, he had to accept that he would have very little time for research and just a lot of teaching, and he did that. You know, to give you a sense of how the field has been, you know, the sacrifices that people have had to make to do this kind of research. I mean, it's silly, really. I mean, the work that Phil did. I mean, now there are lots of experiments testing dynamical collapse theories. It's you know, it's a widely acknowledged you know, plausible approach to quantum mechanics, which he founded. He's done a lot of important work in that area. And he's had to spend his whole career in this liberal arts college where he basically was the physics department, you know, and why? I mean, there's no good reason, really. There's just something wrong with the sociology. Something went wrong with the sociology of this. Anyway, I could ramble on for another all evening about this, but you better stop me. Shut me up, please. Tell me your disc is full and you can't record anymore.
I have no idea how much space I have for this.
Yeah.
But no, I think this is. I mean, I think this is probably enough. I normally have a couple of other questions, but you got through at least one other one. And
feel free if you want to. If you've got time, I mean, I can talk. If you want to ask, I tell you what. If you want to ask another question or two, feel free. And what I'll do is I'll make a conscious effort to keep it short. How's that?
No, I think we've got enough. I think
okay.
I think you've said enough here that people are going to be extremely interested in listening to the podcast. That was really, really great. That's exactly the sort of stuff I want for this
thank you.